My name is Michael Harris. I'm 41 years old. And the day my wife left me for a banker was the day I thought my life had ended. It happened in our own living room, in front of her friends, like it was a performance. She looked me straight in the eye, her voice dripping with contempt, and said, "You'll never give me the life I deserve." He can. She didn't whisper it. She wanted everyone to hear. The he was standing right behind her, a man in an expensive suit, smiling smugly like he had already won. My heart sank. Years of marriage, years of loyalty, reduced to nothing more than a cruel joke, and as if betrayal wasn't enough, she twisted the knife deeper by laughing. "Don't act surprised, Michael. You were always the small man in the room," the neighbors heard. Family friends heard. By the next morning, everyone knew. I wasn't just a husband betrayed. I was the husband humiliated. When the divorce papers landed on my desk, her demands were clear. The house, the assets, and support payments that would leave me with nothing. The banker stood beside her in court, smirking, confident that money and arrogance would crush me. People whispered that I'd walk away broke, defeated, forgotten. They thought this was my ending, but they didn't know that inside that courtroom, the judge's gavel was about to fall, and when it didn't just break her arrogance. It handed me everything she tried to steal. The house, the money, the justice she thought I'd never see. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. When I first met Laura, I thought I had found the woman I would grow old with. We were both in our late 20s, young, ambitious, and full of dreams. I worked as a project manager in a construction firm, and she was an administrative assistant at a law office. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And in those early years, that felt like enough. Our wedding was simple. Nothing extravagant, just family and close friends in a small church. I remember standing at the altar, staring at her smile, believing that love alone could carry us through anything. For a while, it did. We rented a modest apartment, ate dinners on mismatched plates, and laughed over bills we barely managed to pay. We promised each other we would rise together. I worked hard. I stayed late at the office, picked up extra shifts, said yes to every project because I wanted to give her more. And slowly, things improved. We bought a small house, the one I would one day fight for. And I remember the way she cried happy tears when we first walked through its doors. I thought those tears meant gratitude. Looking back now, maybe they meant calculation. As the years passed, my career grew steadily, but not quickly. I was reliable, not flashy. I earned a solid living, but I wasn't a millionaire. At first, Laura never complained. But then the comparisons began. It started with little comments. You know, Sarah's husband just bought her a new car, or the Johnsons are going to Europe this summer. At first, I brushed it off. Every couple compares themselves to others, but soon the comments sharpened. Why don't we have that? Why can't you do more? I told myself it was stress, that she didn't mean it. But then she started spending more time out, always with friends from work. She dressed differently, spoke differently. Nights that used to be hours turned into excuses. Girls' night, networking dinner, I'll be late. The banker entered our lives quietly. His name was Richard, one of the clients at her firm. Wealthy, polished, always carrying himself like the world belonged to him. At first, he was just a name in her stories. Richard said this. Richard recommended that restaurant. I didn't think much of it. But then I noticed how her eyes lit up when she mentioned him. The first real shock came on our 10th anniversary. I had planned a dinner, bought her flowers, and was waiting at the restaurant. She never showed. Hours later, she stumbled home, smelling of expensive wine and perfume. When I asked where she had been, she rolled her eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. I was out with friends, but I knew." The second blow came at a dinner party with mutual friends. Richard was there, seated beside her, laughing at every word she said. Halfway through the night, she leaned across the table, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Maybe if you worked harder, we could live like Richard does." The table went quiet. I laughed it off, but inside, I felt something tear. The third and final was undeniable. I found the messages. Late at night, her phone buzzed with words she never spoke to me anymore. "I can't wait to see you. He has no idea. Our future will be better." My hands shook as I read them. I wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation, but when I did, she didn't deny it. She smirked. "You can't compete with him, Michael. You never could." Those words crushed me. Years of sacrifice, loyalty, devotion, dismissed with a single sentence. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing her respect, her love, and worst of all, the dignity I thought marriage was built on. For weeks, I lived like a ghost in my own house. She came and went as she pleased, dressed for dinners that weren't with me, whispered into her phone with no attempt to hide it. The neighbors began to notice. Friends stopped inviting us as a couple. Whispers followed me everywhere I went. I might have collapsed completely if it weren't for an old friend, David, who worked as a lawyer. When I finally broke down and told him everything, he listened quietly, then said one sentence that changed everything. "Document everything. Don't lose your temper. Let her dig her own grave." So I did. I saved the texts, the receipts, the credit card charges, the late night calls. Every time she mocked me for not being enough, I bit my tongue and took note. Every insult, every laugh at my expense, I stored away. Because deep down, I knew the day would come when she would try to take everything from me. And when that day arrived, I wouldn't just defend myself. I would make sure the world saw her for who she really was. The papers came on a Friday morning. A courier knocked on the door, handed me an envelope, and left without a word. I stood there in my hallway, heart pounding as I tore it open. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her name was on the top. Her lawyer's letterhead stamped bold across the page. The demands hit me like a hammer. Spousal support, half of all assets, and full ownership of the house I had worked years to buy. The same house where I had painted the walls, fixed the roof, and built a life I thought was ours. At the bottom of the petition was her neat signature. Cold, final. I sank into the couch, the papers shaking in my hand. After everything, after the dinners missed, the nights alone, the humiliation she'd served me in front of friends, now she wanted to strip me of the very life I'd built. I should have been surprised, but I wasn't. She had already left in every way that mattered. This was just the paperwork to make it official. The first hearing was worse than I imagined. Laura walked into the courtroom not like a woman seeking fairness, but like a queen demanding tribute. And by her side was Richard, the banker. Perfect suit, expensive watch, smug smile plastered across his face as though he owned the very air we breathed. He didn't sit quietly either. He leaned back in the bench, whispered in her ear, and smirked at me like he was watching a man drown. Her lawyer spoke first. "Your Honor, my client has endured years of financial instability. She seeks fair compensation, ownership of the marital home, and a settlement to maintain the standard of living she deserves. The words cut deeper than knives. Financial instability? I was the one who had kept the lights on, who had paid the mortgage, who had skipped vacations and luxuries so we could build something lasting. Now she was spinning it like I had failed her. When it was my turn, I barely managed to speak. My voice trembled as I said, "I've provided for this marriage. I've kept the house. I've carried the weight. She's not leaving me because of instability. She's leaving me for him." I pointed to Richard. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Laura laughed. She actually laughed, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "Don't embarrass yourself, Michael. You're bitter because you couldn't keep up. Richard gives me what you never could, a real life. The judge banged his gavel for order, but the damage was done. The humiliation burned across my skin. Friends and relatives who had shown up to support shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind their hands. I could see it in their eyes. Pity, doubt, even amusement. Richard leaned forward, just enough for me to hear him mutter, "You're finished, Harris." Walk away quietly, I clenched my fists under the table, but I remembered David's advice. Don't lose your temper. Let them dig their own grave. So I sat there, silent, letting their arrogance fill the room. Every demand, every insult, every smirk. I took it in and filed it away. By the end of the hearing, the judge hadn't made a ruling, only set dates for the next round. Laura left with Richard's hand on her back, her head high, smiling like she had already won. She turned to me one last time and said, "Enjoy the little time you have in that house. Soon it'll be mine." Her words echoed long after they walked out. For a moment, I felt crushed, like the walls of the courtroom had collapsed around me. But then I looked down at the folder in my hands. The texts, the receipts, the messages, the proof I'd been saving all this time. They thought they had cornered me. What they didn't realize was that the evidence I carried would soon turn the courtroom into their stage of humiliation. And when the judge's gavel fell, it wouldn't just break their demands, it would break their pride. If the courtroom had been brutal, what followed outside was worse. Divorce doesn't just split a marriage, it splits families, friends, and even the community that pretends to be neutral. And in my case, nearly everyone seemed eager to choose a side. Laura made sure of it. She told anyone who would listen that I had failed as a husband, that she had no choice but to move on. At family gatherings, she arrived with Richard on her arm, flaunting his tailored suits and polished shoes as if to say, "This is what a real man looks like." One night, I went to my cousin's engagement party. I thought I could blend into the crowd, eat some food, and leave quietly. But halfway through the evening, Laura and Richard walked in. The music seemed to dim as whispers started. She spotted me instantly, smirked, and made her way to the center of the room. "Everyone," she announced, holding her wine glass high. "I just want to say how grateful I am to have finally found happiness. Richard has shown me what true love and true security look like. Something I never had before." Her eyes flicked toward me as the crowd murmured, "Life is too short to stay tied to a man who can't provide." The room went silent. My aunts looked at their shoes. My uncles sipped their drinks. No one defended me. Some nodded politely at her toast. Others clapped weakly. But the humiliation hit me like a wave. Richard leaned over, loud enough for several people to hear, and said, "Don't take it personally, Mike. It's just business and love." He kissed her cheek while looking straight at me. Laughter bubbled in the corner of the room. I could feel my face burning, every muscle screaming to fight back. But I remembered David's words. Document everything. Don't lose your temper. So I forced myself to stand still, staring at the floor, filing every insult into the back of my mind. The whispers didn't stop when the party ended. They followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, I overheard neighbors. That's him, the husband she left for the banker. On Facebook, relatives posted pictures of Laura and Richard, captioned with lines like "Power Couple Goals." My phone buzzed with messages from so-called friends. Tough break, man. But she looks happy now. Even at church, where I thought I might find peace, I felt the judgment. Laura showed up one Sunday, sitting in the front pew with Richard, holding hands like teenagers. During fellowship hour, people swarmed her, complimenting her dress, admiring his watch. I stood alone by the coffee table, listening to the whispers behind me. He just couldn't keep up. It was public humiliation at its sharpest. Every insult, every laugh, every whisper was a knife. But I kept my head down, smiled politely, and said little. Because I knew something they didn't. Behind closed doors, my lawyer and I were building a wall of evidence so strong that no amount of arrogance could knock it down. The breaking point came at a family dinner my mother insisted I attend. She wanted to keep the peace, she said. I didn't want to go, but I gave in. Dinner started quietly enough, but as soon as the plates were cleared, Laura set down her glass and leaned back in her chair. "Michael," she said sweetly, "you should stop fighting this. You know the judge is going to give me the house. Richard and I are already planning renovations." The room froze. My father's fork clattered against his plate. She continued, her voice sharp now. "Why drag this out? You've embarrassed yourself enough. Sign over the house, agree to the settlement, and save what little dignity you have left." Richard chuckled, swirling his wine. "Come on, Mike. Be a man. Admit when you've lost." A few relatives laughed nervously. My uncle muttered, "She's probably right." My own sister whispered, "Michael, maybe you should just move on." That cut deeper than anything Laura could have said. My own blood, siding with her because it was easier than believing me. I looked around the table. Every face avoided my eyes. The humiliation wasn't just from her anymore. It was from all of them. They wanted me to bow my head, to accept defeat, to vanish quietly so they wouldn't have to be uncomfortable. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the fire inside me. "Enjoy your meal," I said quietly, standing from the table. "The judge will decide what's mine. Not you. Not him." I nodded toward Richard, whose smug smile only grew wider. As I walked out, I heard Laura's laughter follow me down the hall. That night, alone in my house, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the evidence I had collected. Bank statements, text messages, receipts, photographs. My humiliation was public, loud, and constant. But soon, so would be theirs, because they thought the judge would crush me. But when the gavel came down, it wasn't my name that would break. It would be theirs. The courtroom was packed for the next hearing. Word had spread through the family and community that this was the day things might get settled, and people showed up like it was a show. Rows of benches filled with relatives, neighbors, even a few co-workers who pretended they were just curious. Laura walked in first, heels clicking against the polished floor. Richard right behind her with that smug grin he never seemed to lose. She carried herself like a queen entering her throne room, already convinced the judge would hand her everything. She made a point to walk past me slowly, leaning down just enough to whisper, "Hope you enjoyed your last night in that house." Richard chuckled beside her, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. When the session began, her lawyer wasted no time. "Your Honor, my client seeks ownership of the marital residence, full spousal support, and equitable division of assets. Mr. Harris has failed to provide the life she deserves. With Mr. Richard Lawson's support, she is finally living at the standards she should have always had." The room stirred. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, smirking like he was already signing the deed. When my lawyer tried to respond, Laura cut her off, her voice rising. "Michael is a failure. He clings to that house like it means something, but it's mine. He'll crawl out of here with nothing. Everyone knows it." Gasps echoed. The judge banged his gavel for order, but Laura wasn't finished. She pointed at me, her finger trembling with rage. "He's pathetic. That's why I left him. He'll never be half the man Richard is." I felt the room's eyes burning into me. Whispers spread like fire. People shook their heads, some even chuckled under their breath. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A faint red glow from a phone camera. One of my cousins, sitting in the back row, was holding his phone low, recording. And from the way the screen blinked, I realized it wasn't just a recording. It was streaming. Live. The humiliation that Laura and Richard thought they were controlling was now being broadcast to everyone in our circle. Relatives who didn't attend, neighbors, mutual friends. WhatsApp groups were already buzzing. Richard, emboldened by her tirade, slammed his briefcase onto the table. "Your Honor, let's stop wasting time. Michael has nothing. Laura deserves everything. He should be grateful we're leaving him with his dignity." The judge's expression shifted, his patience wearing thin. "Mr. Lawson, you are not a party to this case. Sit down and be silent." The outburst backfired instantly. The gallery whispered louder, people leaning toward each other. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across their faces, not at me, but at them. Laura tried to laugh it off, but the sound was sharp, brittle. She looked at the judge and said, "You see, Your Honor, this man is clinging to scraps. I've moved on. Richard is the proof of what I deserve." But the gavel struck again, and this time the judge's voice was firm. "This is not a circus, Mrs. Harris. Continue this behavior, and you'll find the court less sympathetic." The silence that followed was heavy. Richard shifted in his seat, tugging at his tie. Laura's confident smile faltered for the first time. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The live stream had already captured everything. The arrogance, the insults, the outburst. I could feel the weight of the room shift. For once, I wasn't the one on trial. The hearing ended without a ruling that day. But as I walked out, I saw people's expressions. Relatives avoided Laura's eyes. Neighbors whispered into their phones. My cousin gave me a subtle nod, holding up his phone like a weapon. The humiliation they had planned for me had flipped. They thought they were breaking me in public. Instead, they had just shown everyone exactly who they really were. And what they didn't realize yet was that this footage, their arrogance immortalized, was only the beginning of their downfall. Because the next time the gavel fell, it wouldn't be me losing everything. It would be them. The next hearing felt different the moment I walked into the courtroom. The smugness Laura had worn like perfume the last time was still there, but lighter now, as though even she sensed the shift. Richard sat beside her, jaw tight, eyes darting around the room. David, my lawyer, was calm as always. He placed his briefcase on the table, looked at me, and whispered, "Today's the day. Keep your head up." The judge entered, robes flowing, gavel in hand. After calling the case to order, he gestured for David to present first. David stood tall, his voice steady and measured. "Your Honor, my client has been painted as careless, unworthy, and incapable. But today, we will show you the truth, not through accusations, but through evidence." He opened the briefcase and began laying out files, one by one. The first were the text messages, dozens of them between Laura and Richard. Flirtatious at first, then explicit, then openly mocking me. The courtroom gasped as David read aloud, "He has no idea. He's pathetic." Laura shifted uncomfortably. Richard looked like he wanted to crawl under the bench. Next came the credit card statements. David showed how Laura had been funneling marital funds into luxury dinners, hotels, and gifts, all spent on Richard. "This is not a wife seeking fairness," David said, his voice sharp now. "This is a spouse committing financial misconduct while attempting to seize the very assets my client worked to provide." Laura's lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised his hand. "Overruled. Continue." Then David dropped the final piece. The live stream clip. My cousin had handed it over, time-stamped, verified, and already making rounds in community chats. The video played on the courtroom screen, Laura shouting, Richard slamming his briefcase, the arrogance and venom dripping from their voices. The silence that followed was suffocating. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing at Laura. "Is this how you think a marriage dissolves? With public humiliation, financial betrayal, and blatant disrespect for this court?" Laura's face drained of color. Richard muttered something under his breath, but the judge's gavel struck the desk. Silence. David closed his folder with precision. "Your Honor, my client has endured betrayal, defamation, and attempts to strip him of the life he built. He does not ask for pity. He asks for justice." The judge adjusted his glasses, looked directly at Laura, then at Richard. "I have heard enough." The ruling came swift and sharp, each word like a hammer blow. "The court finds Mrs. Harris guilty of marital misconduct, financial waste, and bad faith litigation. Therefore, I award Mr. Harris full ownership of the marital home. Furthermore, given the extent of damages and proven misconduct, Mrs. Harris shall pay a settlement of $8,500,000. Gasps erupted. Someone in the gallery whispered, $8.5 million? Laura collapsed back in her chair, her hands trembling. Richard's smug grin evaporated, replaced with a scowl that couldn't hide his panic. The judge wasn't done. "And as for Mr. Lawson," he turned to Richard, "your behavior in this courtroom has been disruptive and inappropriate. You are fortunate not to face sanctions for contempt." For the first time, Richard had no words. I sat there frozen, the weight of years of humiliation lifting all at once. The house, the settlement, the vindication. I hadn't just survived, I had won. Laura buried her face in her hands. Richard leaned close to her, but she shoved his hand away. The cracks in their perfect facade were showing already. The gavel struck one final time. Court adjourned. As people filed out, I felt eyes on me. Different this time. Not pity, not mockery, respect. Relatives who had once whispered against me avoided Laura's gaze. Neighbors who had called me a failure now nodded silently in acknowledgement. David packed his briefcase, then placed a hand on my shoulder. Justice isn't always loud, Michael. But today, it was deafening. I nodded, words caught in my throat. The same woman who had mocked me, who had told the world I was finished, had just walked out of the courtroom with nothing but shame. And I, finally, walked out with my head high. The day the judgment came down, I walked out of the courthouse lighter than I had in years. But while my burden was lifted, Laura's downfall was only beginning. At first, she tried to save face. She strutted out of the courthouse with Richard at her side, her sunglasses hiding her swollen eyes. Cameras clicked from locals who had caught wind of the case. She smiled for them, as if she could still control the story. But the cracks in her mask were already there. People weren't whispering admiration anymore. They were whispering pity and judgment. Within a week, the gossip spread everywhere. In family WhatsApp groups, in neighborhood barbecues, in church parking lots. She left her husband for a banker, and look what it got her. Nothing. The live stream clip had already done its work, but now the ruling cemented the narrative. Laura wasn't the woman who had upgraded her life. She was the woman who gambled and lost. Richard was the next to crumble. At first, he puffed his chest, insisting it was just money, that he could afford to take care of her. But when details of the financial misconduct surfaced, the credit cards, the hidden expenses, his employers took notice. A banker thrives on reputation, and his was now stained with scandal. Clients pulled accounts, supervisors lost confidence. Within 3 months, Richard was quietly transitioned out of the bank. The same man who had smirked at me in court now avoided public places altogether. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he blamed Laura for everything. She blamed him right back. Their romance, built on arrogance, collapsed faster than it had begun. Meanwhile, Laura faced the one thing she feared most, being talked about. At church, she tried to sit in her old pew, but people avoided eye contact. Old friends stopped inviting her to lunches. Even her own relatives, the ones who had once cheered her on, now whispered about how greed had blinded her. She had a good man and threw it away, one aunt said to another, not realizing I could hear them. The humiliation that had once been mine was now hers, tenfold. As for me, life took a quieter, steadier turn. The house was mine, officially. I walked through every room slowly the night I received the deed, touching the walls I had painted, the floors I had polished, the roof I had repaired with my own hands. For years, I had feared losing it. Now it was secure, mine alone, no longer shadowed by her betrayal. The $8.5 million settlement gave me freedom I'd never dreamed of. I didn't rush to buy a sports car or flaunt new wealth. Instead, I paid off debts, secured my future, and invested carefully. For the first time in decades, I slept without worry. But money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was dignity. Neighbors who once looked at me with pity now greeted me with respect. At the grocery store, strangers nodded and said, "Good for you, standing up for yourself." Former colleagues reached out, some embarrassed for having believed the rumors. "I'm sorry, Mike. We were wrong about you. I didn't need their apologies. The respect was enough." Even my family, the ones who had told me at dinner to just give up, changed their tune. My sister came over one evening, awkward and hesitant. "You proved us all wrong," she admitted. "I shouldn't have doubted you." I smiled, not out of triumph, but out of peace. I didn't need their validation anymore, but it was satisfying to see the truth finally dawn on them. Laura, on the other hand, kept spiraling. Richard cut ties completely, leaving her with nothing but the stain of scandal. She tried dating again, But the whispers followed her. Every man knew her story. The woman who betrayed her husband for money and lost everything. Doors closed on her that she once thought would always open. I would be lying if I said I felt no satisfaction watching her downfall. But more than satisfaction, I felt relief. Relief that I didn't have to carry the weight of her betrayal anymore. Relief that the story people told about me wasn't of a man broken, but of a man who endured and prevailed. Still, scars remain. There are nights when I remember the sting of her words. You'll never be enough. He's a real man. Those echoes don't disappear. But when they come, I walk through my home, the same home she tried to take, and remind myself, I am enough. I always was. The fallout wasn't just their collapse, it was my rise. I began speaking at small groups, men's support circles, even local community events. People wanted to hear my story, not because of the money, but because of the dignity, because I hadn't let humiliation end me. I told them the truth. When people betray you, let them. Collect the evidence, hold your ground, and wait. Their arrogance will do the rest, and time proved me right. Laura became a cautionary tale. Richard became a forgotten name. And I, the man who was once mocked as finished, became an example of resilience. The divorce hadn't destroyed me. It had rebuilt me. And in the silence of my home at night, with the weight finally gone, I knew one thing for certain. They thought the gavel would end me, but it had set me free. The house was quiet the night I realized it was finally mine. No more tense arguments echoing in the hallway. No more slammed doors or whispered phone calls in the dark. Just silence. A silence that, for the first time in years, felt like peace instead of loneliness. I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee, staring at the fireplace I had built with my own hands. Laura had once laughed at me for spending weekends fixing up this place. "Why waste time on a house we'll outgrow?" she said. But now, the very walls she dismissed had outlasted her. The money, $8.5 million, was life-changing, of course. It gave me security I had never known, freedom I hadn't dared to imagine. But money wasn't the true victory. The real victory was that I still had my dignity, my home, and my name cleared. I thought back to the betrayal, the cruel words, the laughter in public. I remembered the night at the family dinner when she announced she would take everything from me. I remembered Richard smirking in court, telling me I was finished. Those moments cut deep, and the scars remain. But scars don't mean weakness. They mean survival. They mean I walked through fire and came out standing. And now, whenever I hear those echoes, "You'll never be enough," I smile. Because I know the truth. I was always enough. She just couldn't see it. What I learned is simple. Betrayal doesn't define you. How you rise afterward does. People will gossip, they will laugh, they will judge, but in the end, it's not their opinion that matters. It's your peace. I tell people this now, whenever they ask how I survived. Loyalty is worth more than money. Respect builds a home, not wealth. Peace of mind is priceless. Looking back, I don't regret the marriage, even with how it ended. It taught me who I am. It showed me the strength I never knew I had. And it proved something I'll never forget. Blood, vows, or promises don't make family. Respect does. One evening, I stood at the window, watching the sun sink behind the trees, and whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. This is my beginning." They thought the divorce would destroy me. Instead, it rebuilt me. And as I closed the curtains, the house warm and quiet around me, I realized the greatest victory wasn't the money or the property. It was the freedom to finally live in peace.